WVTC Radio Detroit. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, X, and our website, www.wvtcdetroit.com, or download our WVTC app from the Play Store for Android users and the App Store for iPhone users. Thank you for tuning to WVTC Radio Detroit and the Community Bell Show with your host, former Wayne County Commissioner, Edna Bell. Stay tuned for insightful information Detroiters will find valuable. Text a friend and tell them to watch with you for news you can use. And now, your host, Edna Bell.
Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Monday at 4 o'clock, so it must be the Community Bell Show. Thank you so much for joining us. First Monday of February, as we begin to celebrate African American History Month. We've got so much history, we need a whole year, but that's beside the point. But we have a month designated as African American History Month, and this is it. This is February. And I'm going to kick the show off with a young man who is going to make history as the next congressperson from the 13th Congressional District and the city of Detroit, the state of Michigan. And let me tell you why this is so important. For those of you who don't know, this district was represented by Charles Diggs, who was the first African American elected to Congress from the state of Michigan. The fact that we don't have any African American representatives from the state of Michigan to represent Detroit is so, so sad and unfortunate. But we're going to remedy that. We're going to remedy that this year in this election because this young man is going to be elected congressman from that district. So we welcome Mr. Adam Ollier to our show today. We are so pleased to have him. Adam, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Always good to see you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm so glad you were able to join us because I wanted to kick African American History Month off with an African American from Detroit who grew up in Detroit, who has lived in Detroit, and I know it so well because he lived right across the street from where I went to high school, like 2 blocks away, and still lives in Detroit, not far from where his parents live in Detroit, who are also native Detroiters, who also have served the city of Detroit for a number of years. Mother, I believe, was a social worker.
That's right.
Father, firefighter. Uncle was in the education system with DPS. That's who I knew before I knew Adam. And so a history in this city and so well deserved to be a congressman from the city of Detroit. So Adam, you're on. Talk to us about some of your history. And some people don't know from whence you come. So talk to us about that.
Well, I think, first it's important for me to say thank you, right? As we talk about this moment, my family, like many families, came to Michigan because Michigan had opportunities. I'm teaching at Wayne State on the faculty this semester. And as I try and explain kind of the history of cities, we talk a lot about what Detroit looks like. And people struggle to understand what Detroit was in the 50s and the 60s and even into the 70s, where it was like the place to be in the world was Detroit.
Absolutely. And that, I'm going to stop you real quick there because while I'm thinking about it, because I'll forget if I don't. You're teaching at Wayne State. I'm going to have to come in one day and talk to you about, I don't know if I've ever talked to you about my brother, who is a documentary person, does written documentaries, has won 5 Emmys for his documentaries that he's written and won and showed on TV in this area about Detroit and our history. And so, we'll talk about that because people really don't know. And it talks about back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and what Detroit was and the people that were here in Black Bottom and Paradise Valley and so on. I'm sorry, I had to say that. You go ahead now.
I think it's important for us to understand where we came from as we talk about where we're going, because people say, well, Detroit could never be that. It's like, no, we've been there and we can be there again. This is what it takes. When we were at the top, it was because innovation was at the top. It's because we were a place where people had real opportunity. And that is what's missing right here in Detroit. Like I'm super lucky and have been very grateful for all the opportunities that I've had. But I grew up in a neighborhood that everybody didn't make it out of. And it's not because it's great, bad, positive, or whatever, but the numbers were just very different, right? When we look at the Motown Museum and why we had such incredible talent, it's because we had a program in our public school system that allowed people to progress and grow. And that was the difference, right? Like Motown was the finishing school. It was not the foundation. It wasn't, hey guys, we're going to start this thing. It was people had music and dance in school and their creativity was encouraged, and people who had some skills were able to go right over to the factory and learn how to do it. And that was, what Barry Gordy's plan was. He was like, we have a factory for cars. Let's have a factory for talent.
Exactly. And, interesting as you mentioned that, Northern High School, where I went, I sang in the high school choir with one of the members of the Temptations. And they were just regular old people and we all sang together. And so that it was like that in high schools all over the city. Talented young people in choirs and doing all sorts of things. And the next step was Motown.
And that's what we've got to get back to in so many fronts and so many spaces. I mean, Michigan for a long time in Detroit have put out people all across the world. Guy I went to high school with, Brian Smiley, is the president of Heartbeat Entertainment, right? And so when people think about Kevin Hart, you aren't thinking that all of that comes from a Detroiter or that, that work is coming out of these things. I mean, the number of jazz musicians and leaders, Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota, right? Like that is a Detroiter because we put out incredible talent. What we have to do is say that we're going to recognize the folks that we've built and give them opportunities to grow and develop their families here. And I'm the product of that, right? And I'm super grateful for those moments and those opportunities, because people like you have sown into me and given me the opportunity to represent the community that I'm proud to be raising my kids in, and to understand that this is a place where we give them more opportunities than maybe we had.
And that's our goal, is to obviously give our kids better. And that's why my goal is to give you better so that you can give your kids better. And I think that's the way we continue and we build back up to make sure that the legacy continues and those young people have not even the same opportunities, but better opportunities.
Yeah. And that's really what we talk about when we talk about the future and why I'm running. You know, what made magic happen in Detroit was you had the opportunity. My grandmother grew up on a reservation in Oklahoma, and she moved to Detroit after she got divorced because her older brother had a good job working for Ford. And so she brought the whole family up. You know, she had 3 little kids and was like, oh, we're moving up to Detroit, right? And on my mom's side of the family, my grandfather moved up from Mississippi because it was like, you know what they don't have as much of in the North? That level of racism, right? Like people were not just getting lynched in the streets, and you could own property, you could do those kind of things. People came here for opportunity and have been building it up. When we think about the civil rights movement and when we think about Black and being Black over the last century, so much of that came from and out of Michigan. You'll remember that I was really involved in recognizing former Mayor Young and swapping his statue, or a statue of him, with that of Lewis Cass. And so, you know, we're really excited. We've been working through that process, but the state legislature unanimously agreed to make that switch. And when we were doing that, there was a time where Coleman Young was a very reviled individual, where people were like, was this or that. And now, you know, people I mean, they're not treating him like Martin Luther King, right? But they are. But when you're in Detroit and you're like, hey, I want to be, you can remember Coleman Young did that. It's like, yes. And he would want us to be doing this. He would be pushing in this way. So we have to remember what he was and not let people take away who he was, because what he was a builder, right? The Renaissance doesn't exist without Coleman Young. I was meeting with the Illages, and, you know, I'm sitting with Chris Illage, and we're talking about their business and their expansion in the stadium and all those kind of things. And he said he remembers his dad talking about how Mayor Young got him his first start with the Fox, and was like, oh yeah, we're gonna make this happen. You know, when he went over to what was Cobo, you know, or Joe Louis Arena, and just started digging. He literally just took a shovel and just started digging. So I was sitting in Councilman Young's office, and he was telling the story of his father being like, hey, we're gonna keep this stadium. And he just started digging a hole in the ground, and until they were like, yes, we'll build a new stadium. And that the Red Wings could have left when the Pistons left. They could have left when the Lions left. But Mayor Young was like, y'all gonna be right here. It's gonna be on the river, and it's gonna be great. And that's the kind of legacy of leaders and leadership that we have in this moment. You know, Congressman Conyers was famous for saying jobs, justice, and peace, and people will remember that and they'll quote it. But he also was the leading charge on reparations at a time where people were like, nah. And now everyone is like, yeah, Black folks are entitled to that thing. How we still haven't gotten to, when we still haven't gotten to, how much we still haven't gotten to. But it took 40 years of him saying, hey guys, you owe me money. And you owe my people money, and you owe my city money, and you owe my kids and my grandkids and my grandma and my great grandma. You owe them money. We'd like you to pay up.
Yes.
That's what we want.
Yes. And it just makes sense. And the fact that our young people don't know some of those stories, that's what our job has to be, is to share those stories with those young people in our school systems, in every school system, not just Detroit, but in all the school systems, and to share those stories with all races of people, because everybody needs to know the story. And the story is, we've got wonderful, talented, smart folk who look like us in this city and around this city. And our young people need to recognize that and know who they are. I dare say many of them don't know who they are. And so our job is to introduce them to their legacy.
And that's on us.
Exactly. That's on us.
that's me listening to you and telling those stories, right?
Mhm.
I think the broader community is now doing a better job of recognizing that they need to talk about Black history in February, and it's not enough. Like when I was a kid, it was like you had 50 million people telling you about George Washington Carver and how the man had done all these things with peanuts. And you had folks like Tom Joyner with the little known Black history fact that went all year. But now people are like, Black history is history, right?
Yes.
And so you see a lot more of that in sports where they're like, Black history is sports history. Because you can't tell the history of sports without Black folks at any junction, in any way, in any day. And the same thing is true about so many other things when we talk about music and culture, but architecture. The president of the American Institute of the Architects is a Black woman from Detroit,
Okay.
right? So, when a young Black woman, right? So Kim Dowdell, who I went to college with, is a good friend of mine, is the president of AIA.
Wow.
And that is in a field that is not traditionally one that we think about, but it is, and she is. And so when we
Absolutely.
have opportunities to lift up these folks who are still breaking barriers, because there have been so many, we just have to keep showing them so that people say, oh, I can do that. I
Mhm.
can be this person. I can do that. And that's what makes a big difference, because none of us do this alone.
Absolutely, absolutely. And now I'm going to do something that you probably didn't know. I know you didn't know I was going to do, but what I'd like to do as a part of your campaign is to have a segment every other week or every once a month or every week for young people to come into wherever the campaign headquarters are going to be and just talk about Black history, talk about their history, just share something about that history with them. I just think that it's important that they know that this is the kind of thing you need to know so that you can be successful, because you're not going to be completely successful if you don't know your history and don't know where you came from and don't know the people whose shoulders you stand on that got you where you are, because you certainly didn't get there by yourself and you're not going to get anywhere by yourself. And so they need to have some of that, just little snippets. Don't have to be long pieces, but just little snippets. Okay, folks, I know this is a campaign office, but all you young people who are volunteering, let me tell you about this person today.
No, and I'm excited about you being in there. You were always there last time and being able to tell these stories. I had Buzz Thomas, former state senator, is my son's godfather. Gave me my first real job, right? I was talking to him about how lucky and blessed I am to have him in my life, because I was the youth governor in high school, and we were at a reception talking about these kind of things. And I just happened to be sitting next to him. There were other legislators in that room, but he's who I was sitting next to and started a conversation with. And I'm saying how, what a blessing that was, because he's been a lifetime part of my life, because I had that one moment of being next to him. And it's those are the kind of things that change people's lives fundamentally. I was like, who knows where I would have been, had we not done this. And of course, Buzz was like, you'd have been right here. And I was like, I don't know. You played a big role in getting here. And I think it's important for us to understand what that means in so many of these other spaces, right? In sports, we have a real track record of saying Black people can compete and are most likely to be successful. In the entertainment world, we see that and we know them. I think it's incumbent on us to do the same in the business community, because there are tons of Black business owners who are doing all of those kind of things. You look at folks like Bridgewater Interiors, you look at Marvin Beatty, you look at
Randy Hamilton, who now has a big contract out in Las Vegas with to do some architectural and work. I mean, just lots and lots of them.
And when you see those folks, that is an opportunity for you to do that work and to be in those positions. And I think that's why it's so incredibly important to have a member of Congress who looks like us, who is talking about our issues and is doing those kind of things. It's not, hey, you need somebody because you want somebody who looks like you. You want somebody who looks like you when other people are looking, because, I know what it's like when the police pull me over, or when I'm driving, like all of those moments that we are dealing with and thinking about. It makes a difference.
It absolutely makes a difference when you have to have the conversation with your son when he gets his driver's license. Who else? What other race has to have that conversation? You know, when my son-in-law had to have that conversation with my grandson when he got his license and got his car. This is what you have to do as a young Black man driving a car. That's a horrible conversation, but you have to have it.
Not as, I mean, so I was in the Senate when Patrick Lyola was murdered by that police officer.
Mhm.
And the day I watched the video, I was up in Lansing, and, you know, I came home and it was late. So I came home, my I think AJ was a year old at the time. And like, I just went in his room and was like standing over his crib. I was like, I need to talk to him about this. And then I just had this crazy moment where I was like, bro, your son is 1. You don't
Maybe wait a little while, a little
like,
bit.
you can't talk to him about how to interact with the police at 1.
Mhm.
But I was so worried I was going to miss the moment to have that conversation with him, because yes, 1 is a little too young, but I'm sure there are lots of parents who thought 9 was too young or thought 12 was too young, and they lost them.
Yeah, you got it. And the fact that we have to have that conversation is something we've got to work on. And I go back when I started the show and talking about Charles Diggs, who was the first representative. There's always going to be a first, but there should never be a last or an only. And that's what we have to deal with. However, there ought to be someone who represents the largest city in this state, and the largest African-American population ought to have at least one. At least one. And it ought to be someone who grew up here, who knows the community, who knows the people, how to talk to the people, and knows the history. It's just that simple.
Well, and I appreciate that, because it's so important that we have an understanding of what's going on in our community. When we talk about housing, when we talk about childcare, we talk about elder care. I mean, there are a lot of folks who
Yes, elder care is a big deal.
I mean, who work their whole life and they had insurance, they had all the things, and then their health diminishes and they can't stay at home.
No.
And systems are not designed for them to stay at home. You know, I spent a year running the Michigan Veterans Affairs Agency, and we see this time and time again with our service members and their families, is that our systems are inadequate. The way we care for our veterans is inadequate, and the way that we care for regular people is even worse. I mean, my first day in office in that role, I had a 104-year-old Navy vet, had served during World War II, was a part of the liberation of the Philippines, was you know, there, and he didn't apply for his veterans benefits till he was 96.
Oh my gosh.
Because
Why?
Because when he came home, they said, "Hey, nigga, take that uniform off."
Mm,
And he just, you know, he got a good job in the factory. He was living,
heartbreaking.
you know, lived a good life, had, you know, had a great family, like did all those things, but he didn't need the benefits, but he earned them. He was,
But they were his, whether you needed them or not, they were his.
And so, you know, so many of us have missed out on things that are ours
Mhm.
because somebody at some point told us that, one, we couldn't have them, that we weren't entitled to them, that, you know, all of these things. And his daughter was just like, "Hey, my dad was in the Navy, you know, what is he entitled to?" And it was like, lady, your dad is entitled to a lot of stuff. Like, he should be getting all these things. And I always tell people, it's like your tax return, right? Like, the government may owe you $1,000, but when you file your taxes and you realize the government owes you $50, $100, $250, you're like, the government needs to give me my money right now. But we have folks who have thousands and thousands of dollars worth of benefits that they're waiting years and years to get on. And as we talk about Black History Month, it's really important that we talk about the role that Black service members have played in advancing us, because we talk about it like Black people did not serve in every major conflict ever. And they did. You know,
a major role. And speaking of how we served, you know, the Tuskegee Airmen, major role.
But that was, again, a part of a history of, they were so successful because it was just them. But they were that because of racism, right? Like, imagine
they couldn't be anywhere else. They wouldn't let them be with the rest of the group, and so they made themselves a history lesson.
Imagine what they would have been in other situations. I mean, you know, Mary Young was a member of the Tuskegee Airmen.
Yes.
my grandfather was fairer in complexion than I am.
Mhm.
And when he tried to enlist in the army, they said yes. And he got accepted to flight school and all those kind of things. And then they were like, wait, you're colored. And he was like,
Yeah.
and they were like, you're out of the army today.
Oh
And
my gosh.
and so, like those things happened, and we have to recognize that they happen. When we think about Pearl Harbor, they don't tell you that some of the leading people who were heroes on that day were Black men.
Mhm.
Black
Mhm.
men who were in kitchens, who were in these other non-combat roles,
Mhm.
but who saved folks, who swam, who took over guns and did all of these things, and that their bravery and heroism is the reason that people survived that would otherwise not have.
Absolutely.
And what's more important about that is we look at medals and it's like, they didn't get the Congressional Medal of Honor, they didn't get these kind of things because they were Black, and those things were downgraded, and they are starting to recognize those things, and they're like, oh well, this person did these 5 things, this person did these 2 things, and this person got all of these accolades, and these other didn't. And it's recognizing that those things do matter,
Yes.
and that it's important to correct them, right? So you look at the Triple Sixes, a group of Black women who were sent to Europe and were giving a bad job in being in charge of the mail in a time where mail was like, for anybody who's ever served in any juncture at any time, maybe before technology was what it is today, mail in the military is huge, right? And
That's the
so,
most important thing you can get is a letter from home.
and
Mhm.
they were not coming. And this
Oh,
group of Black women were tasked with getting the mail right, and boy, did they get the mail right. And, Tyler Perry is making a movie right now called The Triple Sixes, and so it'll
really?
be coming out. Yeah, I think it's coming out this year, but it's telling their story, and this is a story that had not been told. This is a set of women that did not get recognized until 2 or 3 years ago, right? I mean,
Wow.
that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. And where you went to Europe, you went to France, you went to these places across the world, and they saw these Black faces as liberators, as the people who saved them, and they were grateful.
Mhm.
And then Black folks came home and they were like,
Trash.
line, take off your uniform. Don't
Mhm.
you think you big and bad? Like, that's why so many of the folks who you saw in the civil rights movement served in World War One, served in World War Two, because they had these experiences where they were outside of the whites only, outside of some of these things in these capacities. And so it's really important that we recognize the role that service members had, mostly because it's a space where things were not fair, but
Mhm.
where the metrics were much more clear. Same thing in sports, same thing in music, right? Like, you can tell the difference between somebody who can sing and dance, and when you listening to the radio, you want that person that can hit the note, and it matters a little bit less what they look like. And
Yes.
then, you know,
Yes. And like Buffalo Soldiers in Germany, they started calling the Black soldiers Buffalo Soldiers because of their woolly hair. And that was a whole nother group of Black soldiers who helped liberate them. And
mhm,
that's what they knew them as. And they started calling them Buffalo Soldiers. So there's so many stories like that that our young people need to know about that they don't know about. So we need to find ways to share that information as often as we can. Talk to me a little bit, Adam, about what your plans would be when you become congressperson.
yeah, so number one is housing. Housing is everything for me. When we think about what built our nation, what built this community, it's all about being able to have a place that you call home, right? Like, where do you want to be? You want to be at home. And during COVID, we saw how abundantly clear having stable housing meant. We looked through school districts and we're like, oh, these kids just aren't learning. Well, if you really dig down into the numbers, there are a lot of kids that go to 2, 3, 4 schools in a semester, in a
Yes.
year,
Yes.
because their parents got put out over here, they got put out over there. And so they went
And
from,
they're living with grandma or auntie or somebody else.
and they don't have transportation.
Mhm.
So, you live on the east side, your daughter lives on the west side, and when they have to come live with you, they can't keep school on the west side because you can't get them there. It's an hour bus ride. Like, those are the kind of things that if we get stable housing for folks, they will just be safer.
Yes.
And it's something that when we talk about reparations, when we talk about Black people in general and where wealth was stolen from us, it was stolen in that regard, and what your home is worth. It's something the federal government did. Like, we spend too much time ascribing that to individual racism or racist people. It was the policy of the federal government that pushed white people out of Detroit. It was the policy of the federal government that did not lend in Detroit. It was the policy of the federal government that did not allow Black people and white people to live next to each other. It is the policy of the federal government that Black neighborhoods were less valuable than white neighborhoods. And those things still exist today. It's not the redlining, it's the valuation. It's them saying, well,
and whether you can get a loan to buy a house. That's the other piece. And they say it doesn't, but it still exists, that they're not giving the same loans to Black folks as they do to white folks. They're just not doing it. And that is another federal policy.
And it's one that we can fix, that we should be fixing, that we should be spending the time doing. And it just has not been the case, right? It's the number one priority for me. And I think it's something that we should really be squarely focused on. Detroit used to be a place that was prideful in the number of homeowners that we have. And that's an important part of the discussion. But we also have to be okay recognizing that there are lots of places where people rent and still live in nice places.
Yes.
The problem here is we're like, oh, if you're a renter, I mean, like that is because we don't have good spaces for people to afford to rent, right? Like, New Yorkers don't own a home. They don't own those apartments.
Nobody in New York owns a home.
And that's okay, right? Like, people in Philadelphia rent, people in Los Angeles rent, people in Chicago rent.
Yes.
Okay to rent, right? Like, what is not okay is for renting, meaning you live in substandard housing.
Exactly.
And that's what we've got to fix, right? People my age, and I'm super lucky, right? Like, the house we live in, we couldn't afford to live in under any other circumstances, except we bought it right after, in 2010 when the market fell out. And this house didn't have doorknobs. It didn't have light fixtures. It didn't have copper pipe, right? Like, anything that could be taken was taken. And there were a lot of people who bought houses during those days, and we still fixing stuff, right? Like, whenever it rains too hard, I'm like, oh man, is that a drip I hear? I'm like, all right. But like, those are the things that people have got to understand, is we've got to find ways to allow people who have these old houses, who have lived in them for 10, 20, 30 years, to be able to stay in their homes and to have products for that. I'm very involved with the neighborhood service organization. And if you've ever been over to NSO at the old Bell building, it's one of the tallest buildings not downtown.
I know. I used to work there. We worked at Bell, so I worked at that building for a minute. But yes.
And so, if you ever go up top, so I've had the opportunity to be outside on the roof, and what you see when you're up there is a sea of blue, and you're like, well, what is that blue you see? And because you're involved, but you see all these blue tarps on people's roofs because they can't afford to fix their roof. And when you can't fix your roof, when your roof is leaking, that means that
everything else in your house is on its way out.
It's getting worse. You're getting mold in your home. You're having
electricity could go out. I mean, everything.
You're having all these issues, and kids are being raised in these communities. Our seniors are aging in these communities. We have got to develop opportunities for folks to be able to fix their homes so they can age in place, so they can get the kind of care that they need, because we know that people are healthier when they can stay at home. We just got to do the work to be able to allow them to do that. And young people want to be able to buy a house. They want to be able to move. They want to be able to rent and to do those kind of things. There are a lot of folks who spent their UAW retirement checks and they bought them 2 or 3 rental properties in a neighborhood, and they're trying to maintain them. We have got to do the things to make it so you feel great about your neighborhood. That's what people used to do. I would often hear Martha Scott talk about Highland Park and the Highland Park she grew up in, and how it had all of these opportunities from,
it was a wonderful place. I mean, that was our shopping area. And I lived over in Conant Gardens, but Highland Park was where the Sears was, and the Winklemans, and the Farmer Jack, and the Highland Appliance, and the Myers Jewelry Store, and all of those places. Wonderful. That's where we shopped.
Exactly. And it's like we can do all of these things again, but we have to invest in a generation so that they have the opportunity to start these businesses, to grow them in these places. And so much of that comes down to federal policy and federal investment in community. It just is something
Absolutely.
that we haven't got. You know, it's unacceptable to say as elected officials, oh, well, you know, I represent one of the poorest districts in the country. All right, well, what have you done to make it less poor? What have you done to change
It
the
has
number?
not always been one of the poorest districts.
Used to be the wealthiest. It used to be one of the wealthiest, right? So I was just in Pontiac last week or the week before with Goodwill Industries because they were expanding their Flip the Script program. When I first got elected to the state Senate, it was on the chopping block. It had been zeroed out in the state budget, and it was going
Such
away.
a great program.
It is such a great program. And I got some calls from folks. And you know, when you get a call from somebody who you're like, ooh, I got to answer that. And they're like, Adam? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, you need to save this program. I'm like, that's not one of my, you know, that is not the priority for me right now. I got these things that I'm trying to do. They're like, Adam, Flip the Script this is your priority. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right.
I understand now. I hear you.
I heard exactly, because you know, when you get elected, you're like, there are these things that I want to do, but there are also these moments where you're like, these are things that my community needs from me, and somebody has got to do it. Sometimes you think it's going to be somebody else, and sometimes it's you. And that was one of those moments where it was like, no, this is me. This is my responsibility. I'm going to save this thing. And I'm super proud of the work that we were able to do. We got it restored in the state budget for, $1 million that year. And my last year, it was up to $2.5 million. And this year they were announcing that they had expanded from Detroit to Oakland County, that they are going, starting their first base in Pontiac. And we got a chance to talk to some folks. I mean, there was a young brother who was talking about how it had literally changed his whole life. Not like, oh, he went from he was going to be all right to like, now he's doing well. It was like, oh yeah, my friends are dead and in prison. And, I'm going to be a good dad. And like, I'm going to get my bachelor's degree, and I'm going to go back and do these kind of things, right? Like I have real opportunities. This is a kid who grew up in foster care, and he was like, I saw my whole life, I only had this one path, and all my friends who are on that path are in prison, are dead, are slanging. And then, I don't, Dustin Campbell, he's like, and then,
absolutely.
And he was like, and then I just saw the GOAT, Dustin, and he was like, hey, come here. And I came, and then he got me connected, and I'm just grateful.
Yeah, Dustin is wonderful at that. Yes, and Dustin works for Alicia. Yes.
And he was just like, he was just like, I'm just grateful. He was like, I have been blessed with something, and I'm gonna sow more into it. And you're like, bruh, I have been blessed. I have had blessings, right? Like, and if we had been in church and he was giving his testimony, he was saying it like all of the bounty in the world had come to him. And it is one of those reminders when we think about what is going on in our lives and in our world and what we do or do not have. There is someone who is infinitely more grateful for a third of what we have.
Yes.
And they fought their whole lives for it. And in those moments, we're like, I mean, it's an okay day. It's like, no, bro, I'm having a great day. I have more than what was promised to me. And I know that gives me a responsibility to do more for these folks, because I was given these opportunities and this space to make sure that people like him had the programs and the paths that they could walk, because for the rest of their lives, they have been not getting that. They have not been being provided the opportunities to be great, to be successful, and they deserve that.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the big parts. We have a responsibility to help those folk who see no way out. Some of them see no way out. And when you can help them crack a little bit of the door open and they see a little bit, oh my goodness. And they see a little bit more, it gets even better. And then later, they are the ones helping others crack the door.
Yeah. Because that's the thing, right? Like I did not get broad shoulders to wear suits. I got broad shoulders to make holes.
All
And
right.
when we're talking
All
about
right.
what that means, that's where we've got to be doing, right? Like we have
Mhm.
got to be building and opening and owning space.
Mhm.
And that's what a member of Congress is supposed to do. When you look at what Charles Diggs did, when you look at what John Conyers did, what Carolyn Cheese Kilpatrick did, right? Like these were people who were holding space for us and then stepping out of it. They were
Yes.
like, all right, hey, well, we got a seat for that one Black person who's coming in. And they would come in and they would put their person in that seat
Mhm.
and stand until somebody gave them a seat.
That's right.
And that's how you had 2 seats in the room. And then
Mhm.
when they put 2 seats out, you did the same thing and you had 3 seats the next time. And
Mhm.
that's where we should be going, right? There have never been more members of the Congressional Black Caucus than there are today. And
Yes.
that is with Detroit having lost a seat. That is with Detroit missing at the table. We need to fix that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now we talk about housing. We're going to do that. What's something else you're planning to work on in Congress?
Well, I have 2 little kids. And when you talk about little kids, you start.
Lil, his daughter's name is Lily. I think that's the cutest, most wonderful name. And she is just a little sweetheart, Lily.
Well, now she's got activities, right? So she's in elementary school.
Oh my.
She's in public school now. She's in kindergarten. But my son is still in daycare.
Oh,
And we look
boy,
out.
is that a piece for young families? Daycare, childcare, period. Huge.
And so we talk about it like it is a thing for young families, and that is real, but it is a bigger thing for our society. When
Mhm.
we look at the participation rates and we're like, well, we can't hire enough people, that's because too many women have to stay home and raise children. And
That's right.
too many women are staying home and raising children because of the gender pay gap. And
Mhm.
so if you and I are married and I make $1 and you make 75 cents, and we're like, well,
The whole family is cheated.
yeah, but that means that if one of us has to stay home, it's got to be you
Yeah.
because you make a quarter less than I do.
Mhm.
And for Black women, it's even less. And so it's those things that are holding our state and our nation back that we have got to fix. It is not about that family. It is about us missing that person who would have been the next innovator. It's about us missing that person who was going to provide this incredible value to our community, to our neighborhoods, and we're missing them. And they take 2 or 3 or 4 years off to raise children, and that burden is solely borne on the wife.
Yeah.
My wife and I joke because I'm an excellent dad, right? Like I'm
course you are.
an excellent dad, but I would be an okay mom, right? Like
Mhm.
the standards for mom and dad are very different. And
Mhm.
as long as those things continue to be the case, we're going to continue to have a lot of challenges in this world. And that really comes down to childcare, comes down to paternity leave, right? I was having this conversation with one of my college buddies who is expecting his first child. And his wife is going on paternity leave. And he was like, we were talking through his plan. And he was like, well, I'm going to take 5 weeks off at the beginning. And then at the end, I was like, bro, when you're home, you do everything. And he was like, I never thought about it like that, right? Like you're not just at home with your wife. When you are home, you manage the thing. And think about taking a couple days. And so like getting her out of the house and doing all these other kind of things. And because you don't as a dad, you don't babysit your children. And we have too many of this as this expectation that the cost of childcare is borne only by young families. The cost of childcare is borne by
The
employers.
whole family, the grandma and the granddad and the cousins and the aunties and the next door neighbor who's been really nice and working with you. Everybody bears that.
By the way, I heard the way you say the grandmother, because
Yes.
you have to raise these children, and people who have opportunities can do that. But then
Mhm.
that goes back to that same piece when we talk about elder care, right?
Mhm.
So, can your grandma stay in her home, or does she have to go to a nursing home? Does she have to? Because if she has to go to a nursing home, can she have your kids during the day? Probably not, right? Can they come over and spend that time with her? Are those kids helping her stay independent, right?
Mhm.
As we talk about that 12, 13, 14-year-old kid who comes over and takes the trash out and deals with those kind of things, where we see time and time again where that teenage nephew, grandson is coming over and helping their elderly parent, aunt, uncle get up because they're having issues with falling. I mean, I've had to help, an elderly relative of mine who had Parkinson's. And when he has to go to the doctor, I had to literally carry him. And, they didn't have a ramp, and we're carrying a wheelchair down the stairs. Like, those are the kind of things that our system should be providing for people.
Yes.
That it is not. And because it is not, we are losing, because folks have to take time from work. I mean, I know a bunch of folks who have had to go down to part-time work because they had to take care of an elderly relative or an aging relative or something like that, because we don't have family leave. We don't have medical leave. We don't have the things that allow people to take in that 2 weeks or that 3 weeks or that month that it takes to care for somebody they love. And we're like, ma'am, you're not serious about this job. So we're gonna, you need.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna choose my mom over insert job because y'all obviously you don't care much about me because you're asking me not to take care of my mom when she's going through chemo. Well, like, those are the things that we have to deal with as a nation to ensure that people can continue to thrive and survive here. And if we do that well here in Detroit, it will make people want to come to Michigan. It will make people want to expand their businesses and grow their businesses. And we see that time and time again about communities that are growing and thriving.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to get to some nitty gritty stuff about campaigns. You got your signatures yet?
No, we just started picking them up, but we're very excited about it. It's been going really well.
Okay, very good. Now, what are the boundaries of your district?
So the district can get kind of complicated, but if you're going east to west, it goes from Grosse Pointe, so all 5 Grosse Pointe, Harper Woods, the city of Detroit going all the way west, basically midway between Wyoming and Livernois, going down south to southwest Detroit, Lincoln Park, Allen Park, River Rouge, Romulus, Taylor, Wayne, Wyandotte, Southgate, Melvindale, and it's a lot of communities. A smidgen of Dearborn Heights there. So there are a lot of folks in this district going all the way out to Metro Airport, down to Southgate, Wyandotte.
Okay, so we need to make sure we've got people that can help get those signatures. How many signatures do you need?
You can turn in 2,000. You need 1,000.
Okay, that's doable. That's doable. Absolutely. So all of you listening audiences who are downriver, west side Detroit, actually east of Wyoming, east of Wyoming, west through the Grosse Pointes and Harper Woods and Sherwood Forest and all those areas, that's Adams District.
Yep.
So, and if you're at Blessed Sacrament Church, Little Rock Baptist Church, New Bethel, all of those are in Adams District. So I just want to give you some context as to what we're talking about and the areas we're talking about. Make sure that you find an Adam Ollier signature signing person, and go sign his signature. So sign it. We need 1,000, but we're going to turn in 2,000 just to be sure.
And don't sign anybody else's. I mean, I think it's important that we recognize that as a community, we've got to hold our signatures and hold our stuff secure as we talk about going forward into these spaces. We've got to be united to make sure that we have a member and someone who's going to represent them. And if you think that's me, and I hope you do, don't sign anybody else.
That's right. Only sign one. Only sign one, and then one you're going to sign is Adam Ollier's. Everybody, you understand that? Adam, thank you so much for coming on. We will have you on again because we need to make sure you get to be the person representing our area.
I appreciate it. Anytime.
We're going to do it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Tell the wife and the kids hello, and tell your mom I said hello. All is well. We'll keep everybody in prayer because we're going to do this thing.
I can't wait. And I can't wait till you're back going to churches with me.
All right. I'm ready. We'll get it over. Okay. Take care. Have a great week.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the Community Bell Show. We'll see you next Monday at 4:00. We'll have another special guest on next Monday celebrating African American History Month. As they used to say, be there or be square. I know you young people don't know what that means, but that's what we used to say a lot of years ago. But we'll see you next Monday. Community Bell Show.
Thank you for listening to Community Bell with your host, former Wayne County Commissioner Edna Bell. This broadcast was brought to you by WVTC Radio Detroit. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, our website, www.wvtcradio.com, or download our WVTC app from the Play Store for Android users and the App Store for iPhone users. If you've enjoyed this broadcast, tell a friend to tune in. We'll see you next Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern to the Community Bell Show, right here on WVTC Radio Detroit. You're listening.
Go to your Apple or Google Play Store and download the WVTC Gospel Radio app today. You can also say, Alexa, play WVTC Radio Skills.
Would you like to play WVTC Radio Network?
Absolutely. Download it today.
You're listening to WVTC Gospel Radio Detroit, and we're flowing in the Spirit.